Welcome to the Dr. Berkson's Best Health Radio Show. Part of health is hope. Part of disease is chaos and the loss of feeling in control. Right now, much of the world feels like we don't have control. We have total chaos and pandemonium going on in pockets of humanity reverberating around the planet. So what we really need is hope. I was thinking of that song, what the world needs now is love, sweet love, but it's really what the world needs now is hope, sweet hope. So we are honored to the depth of my soul to have wise words from a hopeful mystic that has 40 books out, hangs out with the Dalai Lama, is truly one of the few beings that is totally authentic. You can go through a whole lifetime thinking you'll have a bag full of human beings that are authentic, but it doesn't happen to be so. But Andrew Harvey is really an authentic spiritual scholar, teacher, mystic, known primarily for his popular nonfiction books on mystical themes, on spiritual themes. One of the books that drew me to ask him to be on the show today to help serve you listening out there with words that can lay some hope upon your heart is the book, The Hope. And what Marianne Williamson, one of the other authentic, lovely human beings that's incarnated at the time that we are, ran for the primaries of president. She said this about Brava!
Brava, Marianne.
This is what she said about Andrew Harvey. Take this in. Every age has its teachers. To keep the eternal truths alive for all of us, writes Marianne Williamson. And remember, she's the best-selling book of the Age of Miracles that many of my friends live by. She continues the quote, "In the case of Andrew Harvey, the light he sheds is like a meteor burst across the inner sky." So I asked Andrew here to share some of that light and may it burst across your sky. And he's in Chicago and he's here now. Hi, so much. I have so much gratitude for you being on the show. Welcome, Andrew Harvey.
What a beautiful and totally unearned introduction. I am so happy to hear about this person you call Andrew Harvey. He must be amazing. I am very much still a seeker, still someone who is opening to the mystery. And I'll tell you where I find tremendous hope at this moment. And this will sound strange to many of you, but if you just sit back and let it come towards you and meditate on it, you know what I mean. Where I find hope is in the very extremity of the situation. We have 4 major global crises going on at the same time, and this is absolutely unprecedented. We have a climate crisis, which the world's most cautious experts say is extreme. And the UN has warned us that if we don't change our way of being and doing everything, in 10 years, we'll be plunged into irretrievable climate collapse. That's the first of the crises we're in. The second crisis is that we're in a massive global pandemic, which is out of control and in which America has failed completely to truly create a policy for. The third crisis is the economic collapse this coronavirus is making. And the fourth crisis is all of the wounds of racial and marginalized inequality that are now erupting everywhere to be seen for the horrible, naked, prolonged injustices they've always been. So you're sitting there and you're asking yourself, he's just told us we're in a global dark night event, and he's saying to us that this makes him hopeful. Is he terminally crazy? Or does he know something that we all need to know to be able to share in the truly amazing potential of a moment as extreme as this. Obviously, I'd love you to believe the second. And this is what I'm going to say to you about where we are, so that you can share in this tremendous hope that I have. We're in the event that many of us knew was coming, a major, inescapable evolutionary event, which would make quite clear to humanity that it would have to transform radically or die out, because it had come to one end of the way it related to the world. And we knew for a long time that this event would come in our lifetimes, and it has come. This is the event, this meeting of these four global crises, all of which are out of control.
Is this what the Indian books, sacred books, call the Kali Yuga?
This is the deepest meaning of it. We are in what the Hindus call Kali Yuga, and we're in the potentially last stage of the dance of Kali, in which everything could potentially be destroyed. But there are two interpretations of Kali Yuga. One is that this destruction is inevitable and it will take place. The other, which is the one I believe, which is the one I experience, is that what Kali gives us out of her wild, savage mercy, what the divine does to us, to heal us and transfigure us and give us something we didn't even know we wanted, is to plunge us all into a huge dark night, which takes away all of the controls, all of the understandings, all of the concepts, all of the dogmas, all of the ways in which we've lived everything, to submit ourselves to an overwhelming, shattering experience of ego death on every level.
Most human beings don't really become the best that they could be without plunging down into the dark night of the soul.
It. Everyone listening here who is mature and who is in the real world and who is a truly decent human being knows that suffering and failure play an immensely sacred part in human life. They make us compassionate. They make us generous. They make us magnanimous. They make us truly human. And what's happening on a global scale now is the eruption of a crisis so horrifying that it will make millions of people kinder, more compassionate, more gentle, more awake, more committed to healing racial injustice, more committed to bringing in true relationships with the cosmos, with the creation, more committed to doing everything to stop the genocide of the animals. Because through this immense experience that we're all sharing, we will break our hearts open to the absolute lunacy of the way in which we pursue power and domination over nature and over others, and also to the amazing love that is inside all of us, waiting to be shattered open when we finally stop believing our own crazy propaganda, our own lying, terrible minds, our own addictions to separation and power, and start believing in this immense force of compassion and wisdom that is our divine essence and our divine nature. So the great hope I feel is that I see and I experience in myself, and I see in my friends, and I see on the streets now, in Black Lives Matter, and in so many other movements that are really calling for justice. I see now that this event, terrible though it is the destined event, destined to birth a new humanity. And that gives me unbelievable hope. It's not that I don't see the evil. It's not that I don't see the corruption of the elites. It's not that I don't see the desperation and chaos in people's hearts, but what I also see is a new intensity of inquiry, an awakening to the reality of our appalling situation, a coming together, even in the danger of the pandemic, to protest against the death of George Floyd and to celebrate Black Lives Matter. This is the stirrings of a new kind of human being. And I see that new kind of human being in the faces of the first responders and in the absolutely amazing heroism of the nurses and the doctors who, night after night, day after day, when they didn't know anything about this virus, how dangerous it was, and they knew that their own lives were in danger, they continued to turn up for work and pour out themselves in service of the sick. We've been given the most spectacularly holy and beautiful and naked and ordinary and inescapable examples of the kind of heroic service and love that's going to build a new humanity that is the essence and the spirit of the new humanity. And when you live this situation like this, you live this dark night not only as a horrific experience which shatters your heart, but as a glorious experience that opens your shattered heart, because you realize that the dying is a birthing, the destroying is a creating, the annihilating of the illusions that we don't need anymore, that are cruel and mad, is not a terrible, horrible thing, but the beginning of an amazing liberation that offers us a wholly new way of being on the earth together. So that's the value, it seems to me, of taking a mystical path, is that if you're sincere, you will get to your own dark night. And the dark night is not a trauma or a depression. The dark night is a terrifying experience of being dismantled personally by the divine in a crisis that is tailored particularly to annihilate, humiliate, and destroy you, so that you give up finally your fantasy of being a separate self, your fantasy of knowing anything, your fantasy of pretending that you're in control, your fantasy of believing that you can understand a power so majestic and immense and paradoxical as the power of God. And that experience changes everything if you survive it. And the only way you can survive it is through absolute surrender to it and to the miraculous intelligence that is manifesting it and allowing it to manifest, so as to annihilate your pretensions of being anything at all. And as the experience grows and you surrender more and more deeply in a great passion of adoration and love to the mystery that's tearing you apart, what the mystery graces you is unbelievable visions of new possibility, new ecstasies, new insights into the glory of the way the divine alchemy works, into what this terrible process is actually doing, which is beginning to birth in you a wholly new kind of human being, the divine human being. And this birth happens as you surrender more and more, not because you're doing it, but because the divine is doing it in a shattered you. You can't interfere with the divine doing because you're completely paralyzed, helpless. Your circuits have been obliterated. All you are is one vast loving womb saying yes to an impossible experience, which then, through divine grace, reveals itself as an initiation into a much higher level of divine consciousness and a much more passionate approach to divine love and service. All the greatest mystics have gone through this process because they live as living flames of the fire of the divine knowledge. And what's happening to the entire earth is that the time has come for the evolutionary transfiguration of humanity. It's either death or transfiguration now. It's showtime. We will either learn what we must learn in tremendous ordeal and heartbreak and open to the miracle of a new way of being and doing everything together, we will either learn that and birth a new humanity, or we will die out.
Now, were you hanging out with the Dalai Lama and you guys were hanging like two dudes and he was having this conversation with you too?
Well, he's always the Dalai Lama to me. I have such unbelievable awe and reverence of him. And I've known him for 40 years and have had the great grace to be with him a few times in those years, which have always been momentous because he is an enlightened being and his radiance is so extreme. And what he says is always said with perfect balance and wisdom. And on this particular occasion, I asked him, do you think humanity really can turn this around? It seems, but unbelievably in denial about everything and addicted to our comforts and so unspeakably selfish that any thought of sacrifice to change a situation which is clearly suicidal seems mad. And he said, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows whether humanity can get through. And then he said something that has become truly the Bible of my hope, these phrases of his holiness. He said, prepare for the very worst, but work tirelessly for the very best in the spirit of joy and hope. That's the complete guide to how to live a situation like this. Because the first thing he says is, prepare for the very worst. Do not go into this evolutionary hurricane stupid. Do not go in denial. Do not go in imagining that all will be solved if the president is not re-elected. Do not go in with that kind of fantasy. We are in a meltdown, a collapse, an extreme unprecedented crisis, which is going in many ways to get dramatically worse and bite harder than we can yet now imagine. So going into that kind of crisis without truly building a container strong enough to enable you to see where you are clearly, not seeing clearly is a catastrophe. So you have to prepare for the very worst, and the very worst in this case is clearly human extinction within the next 15 or 20 years. It could go as fast as that in a situation as extreme as this, especially given the new evidence of the speeding up collapse of the environment, which just surpasses anything the wildest doom merchant on crack could imagine. It is very extreme. But then he says, but work tirelessly for the very best. This, for me, is the key of keys, because what I have experienced, and I'm not unique, he is experiencing this on the highest level, and there are so many of us who are experiencing this. What I'm experiencing is that as the very worst explodes, the very best also begins to appear in us and in all of the amazing examples I've already shared with you. So as this horrific crisis darkens and deepens, a vision is appearing of what a new, chastened, humble, transfigured humanity could be like, the new world we could create if we entered into unity consciousness together, if we embraced the one in and as all things together, if we realized that we cannot go on as these demon despots of fate domination that we have elected ourselves to be, and if we came together in awe of the mystery and co-created with the enormous intelligence that we have and the creativity that we have with God, a wholly new way of being and doing everything. This vision is arising right now in hundreds of thousands of people, as well as the vision of extinction. And they're both real.
How come there's these two sides of humanity, and it seems like there's much more of the unawakened side and the greedy and the self-centered side versus people that are quietly trying to serve humanity? Why is it? What do you think? Why does humanity need to have this transformation? How did we show up in this space?
Well, I think that we completely lost the plot. That when we became addicted to reason and to science and to the powers that science gave us to dominate nature, and then the religions lost their mystical truth and the holiness of their inner traditions. So you never had any understanding in the human race of the reality of our true divine consciousness. So you had on earth with immense powers a deranged race, a race that was obliterating its own relationship with the sacred as it claimed this insane narcissistic power to do whatever the hell it wanted to do, killing black people, genociding the bison and hordes of animals, wiping them off the face of the earth, creating empires to keep a few fat people rich. Unbelievable craziness. We fell for it. We enacted it on every conceivable level, drunk on our mad, violent power. And there was nothing that could stop us except her direct intervention in a massive crisis of collapse to break the whole damn structure of total insanity down, to bring down the demented walls of our massive human ego, Jericho. There was nothing else that could have done it. We're so far gone in our orgy of cruelty, domination, greed, narcissism, selfishness, addiction to our own fantasy of omnipotence and pseudo-godhood. That's what's happened to the human race. And she is trying to save us by shattering all of the illusions that keep us addicted to that nightmare, so as to release the divine in us so that we can have one best last chance of truly becoming our real, humble, ecstatic, embodied, divine human selves. It has to be this extreme because the sickness is this total, but also the birth that's possible from the healing of so total a sickness is also more amazing than anything we can yet conceive. So this is a divine event. This is a huge mystical splitting event. And that's what gives me tremendous joy and tremendous hope. Having the privilege to live in such an event, to help other people see it and feel it, and to have the privilege of helping people to the place where they surrender deeply enough and love deeply enough and trust deeply enough that they can experience for themselves this birth taking place in the depths of themselves through this rending, this splitting, this searing, this burning, this shattering of all the previous fantasies, which have ended in ash and heartbreak and horror and cruelty and corruption and racism, and that man putting his leg on George Floyd's throat for nearly 9 minutes. That's where that has ended up.
You know, birth a brand new baby is one of the most painful experiences. I remember when Carol Burnett described it as taking your lower lip, and imagine if you could stretch it out over your entire head. It hurts like hell to give birth. And I love what you're saying is that we can have a paradigm shift and not give all of ourselves to the hopelessness, but to the hope, by seeing this as a birth and not just as a demise.
And experiencing the agony that we will experience, the suffering, the chaos, the helplessness that we experience, not as a curse, but as an incredible opportunity. You know from your own life that you've usually made the biggest progress when you've been flat on your back in desolation, because you have been healed by that desolation from one of your exploding games, from one of the structures that were fake and that were trying to keep together a ridiculous cinema. Right?
Exactly.
That's how it works. So if you can experience this crisis like that and be grateful for every pummeling, for every revelation of limitation, for every shattering of an illusion, then you can be healed of all the fake humanity and the shadow that you've been carrying around for years. You can be brutally killed by one hand of the divine and totally resurrected by the other into a much wiser, humbler, clearer, kinder human being who has awoken from a squalid, sordid, devastatingly lethal nightmare.
That's how all the spiritual stories go, that the seeker goes to the master who tries to kill the ego before the soul can be liberated. So if we do meet the challenge, and if we do transform rather than succumb, how do you envision the rebirth of humanity? What would that look like in your mind and heart?
I think any visioning of it is a waste of time, because it's a mystery so far beyond our real understanding at this moment. If you have ever experienced this force of birth, you realize that any attempt to describe what it could do is like trying to describe the life of a drop of water in the Niagara Falls. It's an insane act. What I believe is going to happen is that millions of people are going to undergo a massive mystical shift and start experiencing themselves in a wholly different way as living, conscious, human, divine beings. They're going to have the classical, grand, mystical experiences in the core of their lives and wake up to this much vaster identity that we all have by grace, and this much vaster power that lives in us, not through our ego, but through our surrendered self, that is a power of compassion and of love and of ability to affect even extreme circumstances by living in divine grace and offering up your whole being as a prayer to make an impossible possible. That's what we're going to discover. And in that discovery, all kinds of new visions will be given us. For example, the most important of these new visions, I think, will be the new vision that will be created by the marriage at the deepest and highest level of quantum physics and mysticism. Because quantum physics is opening us up to, in scientific terms, to the absolutely insanely paradoxical working of the field of light energy that creates, sustains, dissolves the entire enchilada. This one field that is exactly the same in its description as the description given to us by the greatest mystics who've come into direct, naked, interconnected union with this field. So out of this coming together of the highest science with the highest mysticism, we're going to be given completely new visions of how we can work with energy, of how we can heal the environment, of how we can create structures. We're at the beginning of a new language of creativity that will be born in us with this marriage, amongst others, through this great transformatory process of birth that we're going through. And with that new creativity, that new knowledge, that direct access to divine wisdom through grace in the new field, we will be able to co-create and to create structures and institutions and ways of healing and ways of restoring our sacred relationship to the whole creation that will be so amazing, potentially, that any description of them now, even from an illumined consciousness, would be absurd. It's another race. It would be like asking a gorilla to describe a Mozart piano concerto. It's that much of a quantum leap. You see, this is not just a transformation we're in. This process, this terrifying dark night process, is not just a transformation, it's actually a mutation. And a mutation is much, much more intense than a transformation. And if you want an analogy of what's going on, it seems to me this one is a good one, and it's a very powerful one. About 20 million years ago, perhaps, or God knows when, there was a seed that was growing toxic, and millions of the fish leapt out of that sea onto gasping, burning sand. They leapt out into a totally new dimension. And millions of them died because this new dimension was horrific. They didn't have the equipment for it. But others gasped and struggled and struggled and surrendered and surrendered. And over a long ordeal and agony, those fish grew the first limbs and organs of birds, which they were eventually to become. The birds come from fish that leapt out of that sea. But imagine the process of the transfiguration of the fish into the bird, what the fish has to go through. Humanity is now on that gasping sand, that burning sand, gasping for a new way of breathing.
So you're saying we're evolving. We're evolving. The part of the death and the rebirth is part of the evolution.
It's not part of it. It is the crucial event in it, because when the dark night arrives, it shows that the species will either die or mutate. It's what happens in nature. When a species has exhausted its adaptability, there's a vast crisis that threatens absolutely everything. And it either undergoes a mutation and adapts, or it dies out. We're in exactly the same position now. But the advantage that we have over the fish is that we have the record of the great mystics. We have the record of the great mystical scientists, the pioneers of the knowledge of the birth. We have the great ones who broke through into this massive evolutionary process, like Jesus, like Aurobindo, like Teilhard de Chardin, these vast figures who really came to understand this process so they can help us as we go through the immense expansion that is going to happen to those who wake up. It's astonishing.
Now, I know we're speaking to you in Chicago. I'm originally from Chicago, and you said one of the reasons you moved there was because you're really brother and sister best friends with Carolyn Meese.
Yes.
Who is another mystic, really.
Very much so. And Carolyn's and my vision are very interdependent. We see the darkness, but celebrate this astonishing possibility. Carolyn in her own unique way, and I in mine. So we tone and hone and have the most amazing relationship.
And I was so heartened to hear that, because when I had cancer 26 years ago, she's also a medical intuitive at that time. She's not doing that right now. And she literally gracefully let me come to her home and did a reading and told me that I would go on and not get the cancer back, and that I would be doing much of what I'm doing now. And it was one of my dark nights of the soul when you get a very scary diagnosis. So I love the fact that she's been someone who has really added to the evolution of my own spirit. And here I get to meet you, and you're around the corner and hanging out, and you are someone who helps other people evolve and get more comfy in their spiritual bodysuit. And you're hanging out with Carolyn Meese. And somehow that just really deepened the bond and the excitement that I had for all of my tribe to hear your voice.
What are you hearing when you hear what I say? How does it relate to you at this moment in that room, in this experience of lockdown, knowing all the people who are listening, and so many of them come from the front lines, the trenches of this great. They are the ones who are registering at the deepest level this chaos and pain and suffering, and yet showing us also by their courage and their unbelievable discipline and their unbelievable human decency how to rise to this challenge.
It makes me feel so much better, because it's been so disarming and alarming to see what's going on. Right before the show, a friend of mine who's an ICU physician in Jacksonville, Florida, told me that most of his patients don't believe there's even a virus. They think it's a hoax. And that's, of course, where the Republican convention is going to be. And he sent me a video when Florida residents were allowed to testify in front of the courts. And they were saying that if you make me wear a mask, it's like you're putting a knee on my neck. So it's been so exasperating to feel the polarization of humanity. That's been so upsetting on top of the crises, and to be sitting here at home trying to process this all as a human heart. And so it's a constant daily challenge, but to be reminded of the dark night of the soul and how we can evolve through it. I've seen it in my own life. I wrote a book on it called Juicy Souls, How We Give Our Spirits Away and How to Get Them Back. And I know this to be true, but we all need to be reminded.
Constantly. And it helps, I find, to have this map deep in your heart, because when you come to a personal dark night, you'll know that it's that severe, because what's going to be given through it is that amazing. But now we've come to a global dark night in which the entire world is living through this massive death rebirth process, knowing the contours, the geometry, the forms, the meaning, the laws of the dark night is actually the key to staying sane, staying grounded, staying calm. Because once you know that you're in a dark night that is potentially a birth canal to a new humanity, then you know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to allow that birth to take place in you, to turn up as a ragged, bizarre representative of this new humanity, and to really look after your inner self in the deepest possible way, because you'll be in extremely challenging conditions. And so many of my friends are first responders, and I'm just lost in awe at the simple care that they're giving themselves in the middle of the madness, because otherwise they simply couldn't deal with it. But they're discovering through this discipline of saying the name of God, simply of breathing in golden light and breathing out, of really, really feeling that they are in their own humble way the representatives of God in the situation, the divine representative of love and compassion in this chaos, really feeling that. Amazing shifts are happening in them. They're realizing the true nobility of what they've chosen to do, and they're realizing that they have far more capacity for sacrifice, far more capacity for extreme hard work, far more capacity for holding horrible grief, far more capacity for turning up again and again and again when you believe you can't do one more thing without shattering in 1,000 pieces than they ever imagined. It's an evolutionary stretching they're going through in front of our eyes, amazingly. They're the first responders in the crisis, but they're also part of the first group sent through the eye of the storm to evolve these heroic qualities. And
So
that's
I know
what they're doing. Don't you see that?
that is such a great way to look at that. That's such a great reframe of heartfelt universal perspective. That's so helpful to see that.
But it makes you want to fall on your knees in front of
in awe of them, in awe of them. We really, so now I know you don't have a crystal ball, but we're getting close toward the end of the show.
Well, for $1,000, I could give you a reading. Of course not. No, nobody has a clue. Because
we're on the tip, so I was wondering if you had a clue which way humanity you felt in your heart was going to go.
I think we'll go towards the light after exhausting every other alternative.
This is what you really, really think. You're not just trying to be a positive voice. This is what you're deep in your heart. You feel this,
my darling. I have never ever lied about what I felt.
Okay. I just had to check in.
I'm not. I'm trying to tell the complete truth, and I think if you ask me that, and I really answer it from the depths of myself, I think the human race is going to go through unimaginable horror for the next decade. It's all going to explode. I think we'll behave unbelievably badly. There will be horrible violence and cruelty and madness. And I also think that unbelievable, ordinary, extraordinary people will rise and come in groups and do utterly amazing things and bring in new visions. And that there is a good chance, a really good chance, because of the heroic people that I know, the simple, ordinary, heroic people that I know, the first responders, those kind of people, the good people, the people who are the most normal, sane people, but who are infused with calm faith and compassion. Those are the great hope. And I believe that there are more of them than the dark, and that they are going to form an army of midwives and warriors that are going to bring in a new world out of the mad chaos of the old. And it'll be so much simpler and so much more human and so much more filled with love for the creation and animals, and so much more about precisely the kind of heart exchange that we're having now than about bargains for power or status or prestige. We'll finally hang out with God, the creation, animals, and each other, and realize we were always invited to the most amazing party, the party of divine love on earth, and that our substitutes for that party in orgies of greed were not only blasphemous, but truly insane, given what we could enjoy just by being simple. That's coming.
What a beautiful message from a beautiful heart to all of you out there wondering, oh my God, how can we take it? It's part of the birth with a note of hope. Thank you so much. I'm going to let that sink in. I'm going to let that sink into my heart for a few moments. That just is so healing and helpful. Thank you. I was so looking forward to this time. This has been so critical. Plus, I have my glass of scotch. You told me about this incredible Lafroig scotch that was made from peat moss on an isle out of Scotland. And
it's Prince Charles's favorite scotch too. It's the scotch for the scotch. I'm Scottish and I have Scottish blood. So it's a feast of the whole landscape. You're drinking the whole land, the snow, the peat, the mist, the sea, everything's in there, isn't it?
So if you're really feeling scared, anxious, hear the words of hope and wisdom, and perhaps go get a bottle of Lafroig and have a little sip of the landscape.
I think God My father firmly believed that every holy person should have a glass of scotch in the evening. He felt it was the solution to the whole of the human problem.
Thank you so much. And if you now, Mr. Harvey has many, many books. I've read on different sites, 30 to 40 books. I'm not exactly sure of the number, but there are a lot. At the bottom of the show notes, we're going to put his website, his books, a little bit more about him, so that if you really want to, it's a lot to take in. You can hear about who this beautiful heart is. If you really love information like this and you want to pass this forward, please go to drlindseyberkson.com. And at the bottom of the show notes, it shows you how to leave a review so we could pass this incredible and extremely helpful information in this dire time forward. We really need to take words like this, not just all the angst, but words from Andrew Harvey's heart, and pass them forward to know those that you love and those that you don't even know but want to give them more love. Thank you so much for being with us. It's really made my month. I really thank you.
Thank you. And thank everybody out there. I love you and I see you and I salute you.
Blessings, everybody. Bye-bye.